I never imagined I'd end up on the radar of our infamous HOA president, but that's exactly what happened. Karen Wilkins had ruled over Sunnyside Estates like a self-appointed queen for nearly 5 years. She was in her mid-50s, always sporting a tightly cropped blonde bob with brassy highlights, and that permanent scowl etched across her face. Power wasn't just her duty, it was her hobby. Most neighbors either avoided her like the plague or scrambled to stay on her good side. Unfortunately, I wasn't one of them. Somehow, I had become her latest obsession. It all began about 3 months ago when I decided to replace my water-hungry front lawn with a patch of native wildflowers. I went through all the proper channels, filed the request, got written approval from the architectural committee, and followed every single guideline to the letter. Still, Karen took personal offense. "Those weeds are bringing down property values," she had snapped during our first confrontation. She was standing on my doorstep that afternoon, clutching her clipboard like a badge of authority, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I stayed calm, handing her a copy of my approval documents. That only made things worse. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the papers, her lips curling into a thin, displeased line. I could practically see her mind whirring, searching for some loophole to twist against me. "Well, we'll just see about this," she said finally, flashing a brittle, performative smile before pivoting on her heel and marching away. That was my first warning. I had unknowingly stepped into her sights, and Karen never forgot a grudge. Over the next few weeks, the violation notices started rolling in, each one more absurd than the last. My garbage can was visible too long after collection day. Apparently, 45 minutes was excessive. My garden hose was improperly stored when I'd simply taken a short break from watering. Even my welcome mat, a simple tan rectangle with the word home on it, was apparently not part of the approved color palette. Every time I documented my compliance, attached photos, and emailed the entire HOA board. Slowly, the other members began to notice the pattern. Karen's complaints were becoming transparent, petty, vindictive, and impossible to justify. The board's tone toward her started to shift, and that only seemed to fuel her obsession with me further. I'd catch glimpses of her silver SUV creeping past my house at a snail's pace, her unmistakable silhouette visible through the windshield. Sometimes neighbors would text me warnings, "Karen's doing her rounds again. Keep an eye out." It became a running joke in the neighborhood, but to me, it was exhausting. Last month, I finally decided to take my first real vacation in over 2 years, a 10-day trip to visit my sister in Colorado. I made every arrangement carefully. My elderly cat, Merlin, needed daily care, so I hired Jaime, a responsible graduate student recommended by a colleague, to house sit. The day before I left, I sat with Jaime at the kitchen table, going over all the details: feeding schedules, mail pickup, even a rundown of Karen's antics. At first, Jaime laughed. "Don't worry," she said, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "I deal with difficult professors all the time. I can handle an HOA busybody." I chuckled, though my warning was only half joking. "If she shows up, don't let her in. Just tell her I'm away and that she can contact me when I return." Neither of us knew just how serious that advice would become. 3 days into my trip, I was halfway through a peaceful hike in the Rocky Mountains when my phone buzzed. Jaime's name flashed on the screen. I figured it was a question about Merlin's medication, so I stepped off the trail to answer. "Hey, Jaime, everything okay?" I asked, my sister's laughter and the sound of the wind fading behind me. "Not exactly," Jaime replied, her voice tight with tension. "Something happened with your HOA president." Immediately my stomach clenched. "What did Karen do now?" "She let herself into your house," Jaime said, her voice trembling slightly, equal parts anger and disbelief. "I was in the backyard reading, and when I came inside, she was in your living room taking photos. For a second, I thought I'd misheard." "She did what? How did she even get in?" "She said she had a master key," Jaime explained shakily. "Claimed that, as HOA president, she had the right to inspect your property if she suspected a rule violation." My blood went cold, then hot. I could feel the rage rising through my chest. Karen had finally crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. She said someone reported water leaking from your house into a neighbor's yard, Jaime explained. She claimed she needed to inspect the source. I froze, gripping the phone tighter. That excuse was absurd on its face. First off, HOA presidents don't have master keys. That would be unthinkable. Second, my house sits slightly higher than the neighboring lots. Water doesn't flow uphill. The story didn't even make physical sense. It was clear what had really happened. Karen had simply fabricated an emergency to justify snooping around inside my home while she thought it was empty. Where is she now? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, even though fury was clawing its way up my throat. That's why I'm calling. Jaime replied, her tone suddenly light, edged with satisfaction. When I found her standing in your living room, I told her she was trespassing and needed to leave immediately. She refused, saying she had the authority as HOA president to be there. So, Jaime paused, almost proudly. I called the police. For a moment, I was speechless. You called the police on Karen? Of course, I did, she said firmly. She broke into your house. The officers just left. They took her away in handcuffs after she refused to cooperate and kept insisting she had the right to enter any home in the neighborhood. I stood there on that mountain trail, completely stunned. My sister had come over by then, watching me with a look of concern. I must have had quite the expression somewhere between disbelief, fury, and reluctant admiration for Jaime's quick thinking. I cut my trip short by 2 days. My sister understood. I couldn't relax another moment until I saw the situation for myself. When I arrived home, Jaime met me at the door and filled me in on every detail. Karen had apparently used a credit card to jimmy open the side door, something she later claimed she'd seen in a movie and thought was a valid method for HOA emergencies. When the police arrived, they'd given her multiple chances to leave peacefully, but instead, she launched into a wild tirade about her authority as president, waving her clipboard and quoting imaginary bylaws. The officers weren't amused, especially after Jaime showed them my texts, where I'd explicitly stated that no one besides her should enter the house. Karen had been arrested on the spot for breaking and entering, criminal trespassing, and resisting arrest after she tried to push past an officer on her way out the door. The next day, I received a call from Detective Rodriguez, the investigator assigned to the case. Her tone was calm but edged with disgust. Mr. Harris, she said, our forensic team went through Miss Wilkins's phone and found multiple photos taken inside other homes in your neighborhood. These weren't random, each was taken while the homeowners were away. It appears she's been conducting her own inspections for months. My stomach turned. She kept detailed notes, Rodriguez continued. Descriptions of people's decor, furniture, even comments about their personal belongings alongside her so-called violation records. This isn't an HOA issue anymore. This is a pattern of criminal behavior. We're filing multiple counts of breaking and entering, trespassing, and invasion of privacy. Given her position, the district attorney's office is taking this very seriously. By then, word had spread throughout Sunnyside Estates. The woman who had once terrorized the entire neighborhood with her endless nitpicking and rule enforcement had finally gone too far. I decided to attend her arraignment, partly out of curiosity, but mostly to see her finally held accountable. The courtroom was packed when I arrived. Nearly every seat was filled with familiar faces, neighbors who had been on the receiving end of her harassment. The quiet murmur of whispered conversations filled the room until the bailiff called for order. When Karen entered, flanked by 2 deputies, she looked nothing like the polished, self-assured figure who used to march up and down our streets with her clipboard in hand. Dressed in an orange jumpsuit, her carefully styled bob hung limp, her roots showing. Without her makeup, she looked tired, older, smaller somehow. She kept her eyes down until she spotted me sitting in the gallery. For a fleeting moment, our eyes met. What I saw there wasn't the cold confidence I'd come to associate with her. It was a strange mixture of defiance and fear. The judge read through the charges one by one. 12 counts of breaking and entering, multiple counts of trespassing, 1 count of resisting arrest, and several counts of invasion of privacy. Each charge seemed to weigh heavier on Karen's shoulders, her posture slumping with every word. Her public defender, clearly overwhelmed, did his best to maintain composure as the prosecutor laid out the case, detailing how Karen had abused her position to intimidate residents while systematically violating their most basic rights. When the judge finally spoke directly to her, the entire courtroom fell silent. "Mrs. Wilkins," he said sternly, "you appear to have profoundly misunderstood both the limits of your authority and the basic rights of your neighbors. An HOA president is not above the law. You had no legal or moral right to enter private homes without consent. Your conduct represents a serious breach of community trust." Karen stood motionless, lips trembling. The judge continued, his tone sharp and unwavering. "You are facing up to 5 years in state prison and fines exceeding $25,000. I suggest you take this time to reflect on the difference between enforcing community standards and committing crimes under the guise of authority." That was the moment Karen's composure finally shattered. Her face crumpled, and she let out a faint, broken gasp that echoed through the courtroom. "But I was just enforcing the rules," she whispered weakly. The bylaws," the judge interrupted firmly, "do not supersede state law or the Constitution. You would do well to remember that before your trial." As the deputies led her away, she looked around the courtroom one last time at the faces of the very neighbors she'd tormented for years. Her expression was one of dawning horror, a silent realization of how far she'd fallen. "I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anger anymore either. Just relief. Relief that the neighborhood could finally breathe again, free from the tyranny of one woman who had mistaken control for community." Karen's reign was over this time, for good.